How would you like to be on this stage right after that last talk about how to make a concise speech? Okay, so I'm going to try to practice this. You ready? Okay, so I got two headlines. Brown-Forman supports the IdeaFest not only because it's a good thing to do, but because we get enormous value from it. Headline number 2, our next speaker is going to be talking about an issue that we work very, very hard at our company, which has to do with diversity and inclusion. How's that for 2 headlines? You got that? Okay. So that was the what, right? Now I got to do the why, I think. So anyway, so at Brown-Forman, we ask our employees 4 questions. Every single one of them, 4,400 of them around the country, around the world. Do you think for yourself? Do you say what you think? Do you do what you say? And are you true to yourself? And so obviously, to think for yourself and say what you think, it all starts with ideas. I mean, our whole business is founded on ideas. We live or die by having great ideas. We think this festival is so important that we bring in leaders from around the world to participate. So you all probably didn't realize this, but sitting amongst you over the last few days, our Russian country manager, Polish country manager, folks from South Africa, Western Europe, it's hugely, hugely important to us. So here's the segue to the speaker. The challenge we have is we have people all over the world, different cultures, different languages, and they can all think for themselves and say what they think, but if no one's listening, it has 0 value. So that's the inclusion part. So this next speaker, Bill Bishop, is going to talk about a critical dimension of this and one of the challenges we have not only in the American political scene, but just in our daily lives, of how can we understand and appreciate each other and literally let every single individual leverage their individual value to great purpose. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Bishop. He's a native of Louisville, Kentucky. In fact, I think there were a few kids here from Atherton High School. He went to Atherton High School. He wrote for the Lexington newspapers, and he's written this very, very provocative book, The Big Sort. My pleasure to introduce you to Bill Bishop. Bill?
Hello. It's great to be here, back in my old hometown, and I think Delta Dental has. I went into the bathroom, and you can get a filling in the bathrooms. It's fantastic. But so anyway, I've introduced this talk about as something about political demography, and it is, but I think it's about something more than that now. It's really a window in how we're living in the world today, and we're living in the world today much differently than we used to. So we have these pictures of disagreement that we're all familiar with, and we're angry in our politics, and up to today, and some of us are more angry than others, and there's the governor of Arizona shaking her finger in the president's face, and there's this. I'm told that this in the background is the Oakland Bay Bridge, so this is out there on that coast. And so the question is, why do we have such strong disagreement? And what I think it's partially a result of is this social phenomenon. And from 1940s to after the war until the mid-1970s, places in the United States were getting more alike in every way. We were desegregating. From the 1970s until now, places in the United States are getting more different. They're sorting. And we are segregating, not segregating by race, not necessarily by religion, not by the way we look, but by the way we live, think, and every 4 years or every 2 years, or coming up in November, is how we vote. So there are 2 things to think about before we go through this, and the consequence of this phenomenon is that the price we pay for living in more homogeneous groups is a decline in tolerance and also an increase in extremism. Our politics has become more about tribe these days than about policy, because each side defines itself in opposition to the other. And the second thing is that the country has replaced a trust in a nation with isolated and more insulated individuals and communities and groups. And in this world, the bad thing is it'll be hard for the nation to make a decision. The good thing is when people are all the same in a more homogeneous city or county, it'll be easier for them to make decisions. So in Austin, where I used to live, we buy every kind of alternative power thing you can imagine, and it goes through without but nationally, it's going to be increasingly hard to make those decisions. And so we see this weird thing, and guns for some people are a solution in parts of Texas. You get safer by everybody having a gun, open carry and all that business. In other places, we get safer by getting rid of guns. We just have this weird thing going on across society. So you can see what I'm talking about in the vote. Since the 1970s, there are about 3,100 counties in the United States. Beginning in the 1970s until now, about 2/3 of those counties have become increasingly either Republican or Democratic. You can see it in Los Angeles County here. It got increasingly Democratic. The Republican vote goes down, especially after the Reagan elections. And here is Tom Green County, Texas. I have relatives out there. It's San Angelo in West Texas. The dip there in the Republican vote is Ross Perot. But basically, it's gotten more Republican over time. Well, that's the way most of the country is. The way we looked at it, and I worked on this with Robert Cushing, who was a sociologist and statistician at the University of Texas. We looked at landslide counties. We looked at places where people lived where one group or another, either Republicans or Democrats, won by 20 percentage points or more. And in 1976, that close Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford race, about a quarter of the population lived in one of these landslide counties. And then we began to sort. This is 1976. The black counties are Democratic counties that were landslide. The gray counties are Republican counties that were landslide. And like I said, you got about a quarter of people living in a place where a very close national election wasn't close at all. As we go through the years, in 2004, you got up to about 45% of the country living in one of these landslide counties. Also a close race. John Kerry versus George Bush. 2008, sorted more, got up to about 49% of the country living in one of these landslide counties. And then remember, this was 2008. This was when we had Barack Obama. There's no red America. There's no blue America. We're all one. On one side, on the Democratic side, and on the other side, you had, the maverick John McCain. He's not a real Republican. He's a maverick. He's not really a captured. Well, we sorted even more. By 2012, you had 52%. The election got closer nationally in 2012 than in 2008. And the percentage of people who lived in a landslide county increased. And through all this, our politics has gotten just stagnant. It's like we're set in concrete. So these are the 208 counties that flipped between 2008 and 2012. Only 208 out of 3,114 counties. That means they were Republican in 2008 and Democratic in 2012 or vice versa. This is the lowest number of flippers counties in the last 100 years. And it happens at the state level too. In 1976, there were 20 states within 5 percentage points in that election. By 2012, there were only 4 that were within 5 percentage points. So at every level, from community up to state, we're getting increasingly either Republican or Democratic over this last 40, 50 years. And we did these stories for the Austin newspaper, and the first reaction, people said, you all are crazy. People don't look at the voting records of a place before they move there. That was our contention, that people were moving to be around others who were like themselves. Democrats were attracted to places where there were other Democrats, Republicans that were Republicans, and that was the process that was creating this political sorting. And the people said, no, that is not true. And we had, when I left college, worked in Whitesburg for a little while, came back to Louisville. I moved directly to a place on Cherokee Road, then moved over to Bonnycastle, just down the street from Leatherhead, right? If you live 2 blocks from Leatherhead, odds are you sort of live in a Democratic neighborhood. And the same thing happened when we moved to Austin, Red State. We drove around Austin, put little smiley faces on a map, and promptly moved into a neighborhood that was 90% Democratic. So I decided to devise a test for my wonderful audiences about whether you can tell just by looking whether a place is Republican or Democratic. So here's the first slide. Any ideas? This is my neighborhood in Austin. I don't know. These things just sort of seep out of. And we moved recently west of Austin to Fayette County, and the scenery is a little bit different. And I think it is. I won't have any suspense here. This is a Republican county. And okay, here we go. This is on the main street of Lewiston, Idaho. And yes, if this is on the main street of Lewiston, of your hometown, this is a 70% Republican county. And we get extra credit points for JBS.org. What does JBS stand for? John Birch Society. Very good. And there's something about Democrats that like to put crap in their front yard. It's just, they can't help themselves. This is wonderful Bobby Pearl, lived right around the corner from where we used to live. And yard art, there's a yard with a bunch of bowling balls in the front. It's just the way they are. And Republican neighborhoods, this is south of Minneapolis, St. Paul, very Republican neighborhood. It has a different look. This is Trinity, this is in Austin. Democratic churches have divided. Their churches, churches go to the left, they go to the right. This is not far from the Methodist church where George Bush went to church. He didn't go to this church because this church on Wednesday nights when I went there had a Wiccan workshop. And there's always a lot of explaining about what, anyway, you read all that and yeah, okay. Again, south of Minneapolis, different look, it's not as much explanation, but do you really have to have a lot of explanation? Anybody know where this one is? Where? This is made by Harrison Mays, who was, and this shows you, it's a little bit complicated. Harrison Mays was from Middlesboro, Kentucky, and he made these signs all over. This one actually is in Harlan Town, and I think that road goes to Virginia. And Harrison Mays made signs, and I think the first sign he made was he wrote on the side of the pig, it was a small pig, so he could only write "sin not," and release the pig onto the. And he made these signs he had them all lined up to go to Pluto and Mars and the moon, but anybody over the age of 55 would have seen them all over the South on the sides of roads. When this sign was put up, this was a Democratic county because working class places were Democratic. Now, as class becomes less of a function of politics or have an impact on politics, and religion has a bigger impact on politics, Harlan County is now a Republican place. And here's my favorite way of deciding whether a place, it's called the dog poll. And I went up to this is in my neighborhood in Austin, and I asked the owner of the dog, I said, that's a sweet dog. What's your dog's name? And she said, my dog's name is Che. And if a dog picked at random at a polling place has the name of a South American revolutionary, This was the Tuesday before the weekend when they were doing a general feng shui of the junior high school, and actually the elementary school, just over from us, the official school color was tie-dye, and so it's like a Jeff Foxworthy routine, you know. You know you're a Democrat if your kid has a tie-dye football jersey on. So what we're saying is that people are sorting not necessarily by politics, but by lifestyle. And lifestyle, but now reflects politics in a very strong way. For example, people here Pew did this. People were given a choice. They could live in houses that were either larger and farther apart, but the schools were where you had to drive to them, or they could live in houses that were smaller and closer together, but you got to walk to schools and restaurants and movies and that sort of thing. Well, consistently liberal people, 8 out of 10 of them, wanted to live in the smaller houses where you could walk to things. And consistently conservative, almost 8 out of 10, preferred the exact opposite kind of place. And I was up in Minnesota, and these Republicans, they were organizing south of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the National Party said, we want you to do a poll so you know where the Democrats live. And they said, hell, we don't need to know. Just look at the distance between the houses. You know, as it gets bigger, and that's the way it works now. Democratic landslide counties in presidential elections have 8 times the population of Republican landslide counties. And in Congress, the median Democratic House seat is 11 times more densely populated than the median Republican House seat. We live in 2 different Americas. Another way to tell is, this is Max Ernst's painting of Mary spanking the Christ child, in case you're wondering, is looking at where people use corporal punishment to deal with their children. And Mark Hetherington was a political scientist in Vanderbilt University, and he put together a chart showing the vote for Bush, I believe it was 2004, and the percent favoring physical discipline. So you have the weenies over here in Massachusetts and Vermont. Low percentage wanted physical discipline for their children, low percentage of Bush. And then you had tough guys up in Idaho and Wyoming, high percentage. This lifestyle is totally connected to politics. And another way is family formation. The higher percentage of people who live with someone without marrying them, the higher the percentage of the vote is Democratic. So, and that continued on through 2012. The higher the shacking rate, the higher the Democratic vote. And that's continued to get stronger over time. I mean, Republicans, we buy different books, we watch different television programs. 19% of Democrats in people in Democratic counties own guns. In Republican counties, it's over half. We went and picked up a dog at a person had one we adopted, and he was an open carry guy, and on his front gate it said, "If you can read this, you're in range." And his wife wore a Tea Party T-shirt, and so we didn't begin to look for this when Bob Cushing and I, we were trying to figure out why some places were rich and some places were poor. I came from Kentucky, more poor than Austin, Texas. And what we found was that in every conceivable way, places were sorting out. And one good example is education. Dark red counties are well below the national average in percent of people, adults with BA degrees. Blue, above average in percentage of adults with BAs. And so that's 1990, 2000. Even as people were getting more educated, educated people were clustering in particular places. And uneducated people were clustering in particular places. So red got more by 2009. You can just see this increase over just a very short period of time where the country wasn't getting more integrated educationally, it was getting less. And it has all sorts of economic consequences. Back when we first started checking in the 1970s, Louisville produced about as many patents per person as Austin, Texas. Well, since then, you can look at the educated people moving to Austin in droves, not as much in Louisville. Patent production skyrockets in Austin, economy skyrockets in Austin, less so in Louisville. And this became true in every way we could see. There was this differentiation from place to place. Suicide rates were beginning to change from one place to another. Regional accents were increasing. For most of the history of the country, people were living longer lives than their parents. Well, since 1987, the counties in red, people are living shorter lives than their parents. And when you looked at how society as a whole was set up, this is the way we were doing it. Back in the 1950s, we went to our neighborhood churches, and you just went to your neighborhood church. But in 1965, for the first time in American history, fewer people fewer people were going to church. There was a fall off in church membership across the denominations. And people, how do we get people back into church? And a group of preachers, here's one of them, Rick Warren out in the Saddleback Church, rediscovered this a missionary who had spent his time in India. His name was Donald McGavran. And Donald McGavran said, people in India, they're not going to come to a church where the people don't speak the same language as they do, where they sing different kinds of songs, where they eat different kinds of food. He said, people want to come to a place where they can see people like themselves and do the things they do outside of church. And so he developed the homogeneous unit principle of church membership. And it was for missionaries, but this new group of preachers, Rick Warren being one, he wrote in the Purpose-Driven Church that he read McGavran, and he said, that's the way I build my new church in Orange County, California. And so he did a market survey, and he developed his model person who would come to the Saddleback Church in Orange County. It was Saddleback Sam, and Saddleback Sam, he likes a good parking lot, and he likes a good sound system, and he prefers casual, informal over the formal, which is why whenever you see Rick Warren, he looks like a cruise ship, activities director, and he expects now, we all expect to see in our lives and the places that we go, ourselves reflected back in where they are. They expect to see people like us where we're going. So, in 2004, John McCain and Barack Obama came to Saddleback and they knew, you don't wear a tie to Saddleback. You don't want to upset Saddleback Sam and Saddleback Sally. And so they didn't wear, they came tieless. And, but that's the way everything now in the United States is set up. And we're all set up sort of like the megachurch. When Billy Graham gave he'd have his revivals. At the end of his revival, he'd have an altar call, and people would come to the altar to commit themselves to Christ. And he made sure that when an old white guy came up to the altar, he was met by another old white guy. A young woman met by another young woman. So the first thing you would see in your new life, in your new church, in your new religion, is someone who looks just like you. And it was really interesting to talk to Matt Dowd, who helped organize the Bush campaign in 2004, and they realized what was going on. They knew that there was no middle left in American politics. There was nobody to convince to vote for Bush. What they had to do was get turnout. And they looked at these experiments coming out of New Haven, Connecticut, and they tested a whole bunch of ways to turn people out. And robocalls don't work, by the way. Mailers don't really work. Having someone knock on the door asking you to vote, that works. But what Dowd and the Bush people figured out was that you could get an extra bump, an extra large bump, if the person who knocked on the door was from the neighborhood, if it was someone who looked just like you. That was the way to really turn out people. And the Obama people figured that out. Claire McCaskill, senator from Missouri, was quoted in the Washington Post telling Obama volunteers that the most important thing you have to tell prospective voters is that Barack Obama is just like you. And so the face-to-face community campaign that Bush developed in 2004, Obama simply transformed into a Recruit Friends campaign in 2008 and 2012. And it's called really brilliant politics by young hipsters in one media. The megachurches call it friendship evangelism, and it's the exact same thing. So, what happened? And this is where I want to talk a little bit about this general change in the way people live in the world. And it began in 1965, like with the collapse of the churches. Well, everything collapsed in 1965. Society really lost its traditions, its glue. Newspaper readership peaked in 1965 and then began to decline. Robert Putnam wrote his book, Bowling Alone, about the decline of civic groups. They all began to lose their membership in 1965. Bowling league membership peaked in the mid-1960s and then declined afterwards. Churches declined in 65. Divorces began to increase. So did crime rates. In 1964 and early 1965, people's trust in government was the highest it had ever been. It was around 80%. Or I'm saying 65%, aren't I? Yeah, it was, and then began to decline afterwards, after 1965. And when you think about it, 1965 was the last time we really produced this big government kind of activity. It was when Medicare was founded, Appalachian Regional Commission, the National Endowment of the Arts, which helped create this building, was created in 1965. After 1965, trust declined in government. We just no longer believed that we could collectively do much. And we have all sorts of explanations for that are America-centric. We blame Vietnam, or we blame Monica, or we blame the debacle in Iraq, or Watergate. But the trouble is, in every industrialized country about the same time, in Germany, Japan, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, you name the country that is a first world country, the same thing happened. Trust in government, trust in institutions began to decline at the same time, which leads us to believe that these structures of modern society that had created this modern society had lost their power. And there are several ideas about what happened, and here are a couple of drivers that were part of our modern world that destroyed the world, that destroyed the society that all that was built on. One was wealth. As people got more wealthy, they no longer had to worry about, and their survival was assured, they no longer had to worry about being a member of a group. The power of the group over the individual began to lose its hold. And people, as they got more wealthy, their ideas of what they wanted, they were less concerned with survival issues, and they were more interested in environment and individual rights. Education was another driver. The more people knew, the more power the individual had, the less concerned they were with the groups that surrounded them. The economy prefers loose ties among people. And this whole Ideas Festival is about how to get ideas bubbling up from everybody. Well, the places where the ideas bubbled up the quickest were the places where there were fewer ties among people in the community, where there was less trust, where people were less likely to be involved with family, where they were less likely to be involved in civic activities. The trade-off for a vibrant economy was a less vibrant society and less vibrant civic culture. Diversity. It's hard to, sociologists say, that French farmers lost their religion as soon as they landed on the train platform in Paris. When you see a whole bunch of different things around you, it's hard to believe that you have the one true way of proceeding. So the old ways that we defined ourselves by community, by our work, by tradition, all lost their hold. And self-invention, creating ourselves daily, became our one most important job. And you can see it actually in some books. Think about John Kennedy introduced himself in the 1950s by writing Profiles in Courage. It was about the Senate, about people in the Senate confronted this institution and how they became, how they fought as individuals within a set group of traditions and an institution. Barack Obama wrote Dreams from My Father. 50 years later, it was about a person trying to find himself in a world with no tradition and little structure, no family, and the book ends with finding a community in Chicago. There's an interesting, this is a drug name, but K-Hole Consulting in Brooklyn says that people were once born into communities and had to find their individualism. Now they're born as individuals and have to find their communities. And that's the difference in the world that we have now. And one of the consequences, I think, of that trying to find your community is that we sort. We look for communities where we look for places where we can see ourselves and our tenuous grip on who we are reflected back to us in coffee shops or green lawns or whatever it is that helps us define who we are today. People sorted into homogenous groups, just like at church, and politics as a result became more about tribe and identity than about policy. Now, what's wrong with this? Well, trouble is homogenous groups go to the extreme. There are all sorts of experiments. They took some French students during the time of de Gaulle, put them in a room. They hated America when they went in. They discussed America in their little group. When they came out, they hated America more. Like-minded groups tend to become more extreme over time in the way that they're like-minded. You put Republicans in a room and have them talk about abortion and global warming, and they move to the right after that discussion. People hear arguments that support their own point of view, and they compete to be who's the most righteous of the group. In our old neighborhood in Austin, it wasn't enough to vote against Bush. You had to put an impeach Bush sticker on the back of your car just to show everyone that you're a good, stable, righteous member of the group. The thing is, mixed company moderates opinions, but we don't really mix anything anymore, and our politics becomes this increasingly tribal affair and more about identity and self-expression than about policy or governing. And as a result, the middle drops out of our politics. This is the percent of moderates in the House and Senate. And for those of you who think that maybe redistricting and gerrymandering is the cause of our problems in Congress, you should note that the Senate and the House show the exact same decline in moderates over this period of time. And nobody's gerrymandered state boundaries, right? So, this is a general phenomenon. And policy then, perceptions then shape the way we think. If we are Democrats, we think a certain way, and Republicans think a certain way. Pew asked the same question about the National Security Agency, NSA, in 2006 during the Bush administration, and then 2013 during the Obama administration. Was NSA doing the right thing? 75% of Republicans in 2006 under Bush, great. Democrats, terrible, 37%. Obama comes in, the numbers reverse. Who we are determines, and who we identify with as a group determines what we think as much as anything else. And this has been growing over time. This shows a difference between in gender and religion and income and education and race. There are differences in basic values between blacks and whites, between higher educated people, lower educated people, between men and women. But those differences have remained stable over time. The one thing that has changed, and the difference in values that has increased over time, the difference has been in whether you identify yourself as a Republican or a Democrat. That's where we're segregating, and that's where we're diverging these days. Now, this isn't a new problem. Groups have always had trouble getting along. And there was a British anthropologist went to Africa to study these tribes that somehow managed to get along. And he found that they had a strict rule. You didn't marry anyone in your own tribe. You had to marry someone from another tribe because it was unlikely that you'd go to war against your in-laws. And they all had a saying. They said, they are our enemies, we marry them. And today, we don't even date our enemies, right? Match.com, that sorts people by, that's one of the major questions is whether you're Democrat or Republican, and that's who we date. And in 1960, 5% of people, Republicans and Democrats, said they'd be upset if their son or daughter married someone from a different party. Today, it's over 50%. Political party now means more to our choice of mates than body type. A fellow at Rice University found, and that's why only 9% of marriages these days are between Republicans and Democrats. And so oddly, our worldview then is getting smaller. Given the chance to live anywhere, we have the internet, we have all our technology, but we decided to restrict ourselves to smaller and smaller places. We're increasingly living around people who are most like us. Manuel Castells, who's a sociologist in California, wrote, he said, when people find themselves unable to control the world, they simply shrink the world to the size of their community. And there's an Old Testament scholar, we don't always make progress. Walter Brueggemann talked to Episcopal bishops, I heard him, and he said, back when they made the Old Testament, there are two different creation stories in Genesis, right? One rib is one way, and God just created man and woman in another section. And they said, yeah, put them both in. Yeah, we'll have two creation stories. What the heck? We can get along. It's not in. He says, Brueggemann wrote recently, there's an ideology at work among us that wants to make the world very small in order to make it safe for us and to exclude and eliminate everyone who is not like us. Instead of including people like the Old Testament writers did, we want to exclude people because it makes us feel safer. Now, the fear of the other used to concern people, is used to concern people who don't look like us. Now it appears the greatest fear we have is people who don't think like us and don't live like us. And we are dealing with the consequences in America today. Thank you all for coming. Oh, wait a minute. I like her.
Why don't you have a seat? There's microphones for those who want to ask questions. Just a reminder, we're having a book signing right after this. Bill will be outside signing some books. Before I ask, I'll start the first question with Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. One of the measures that he used was playing card sales. That playing card sales dipped starting in about the late 1960s, early 1970s. How many people in here go to other people's houses to play cards? Raise your hand. Not too bad, but that's a lot more than I thought there'd be. Yes, ma'am.
Quick background, and then I'll do the headline. I've worked for 2 state senates, and behind closed doors, they were very different than they were in the public, especially in the extreme opposing sides. I'm sure a lot of us in this room have very different beliefs, and yet we can still have a dialogue. So in all that you've seen, have you seen anything that can bring it back together, where we're not having the middle drop out completely?
Well, the political scientists would say what you need are cross-cutting issues. You need an issue to arise where the two sides aren't set. And there has to be perhaps a coalition between the two sides to come to a solution to a common problem. And in fact, that's where, when you have groups arguing, the way to get them to stop, when you bring them together, give them a common problem to work on. But we seem to be able to turn all our common problems into issues where we use to define ourselves. And I think that maybe is the difference, is that in effect politics is working now. It's just solving a different problem. And the problem is identity these days, who we are, defining who we are, not policy, not solving an issue for the country. So we use politics to define ourselves, and if the two sides get mixed up, what happens to our identity? And so, in a sense, politics is working until we no longer have the need for using politics for identity construction. We're going to continue to have the same problem on a policy plane. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it just leads into more questions.
You talked about the decline in tolerance, and this is certainly true for those that work on college campuses, where we are starting to see a rise in trigger rooms or trigger warnings and safe rooms where students don't want to hear about controversial subjects like creation or evolution or abortion or wages, for example. How has this sort affected our ability to educate citizens?
Well, I think this goes back to the same issue that our tending to the self and constructing of the self is our primary occupation. And so anything that endangers us, endangers our conceptions of ourselves, is more important than anything else. And so these issues of disrespect and our place and they become more important, while old political issues about the economy and maybe workplace safety and things that were material things become less important as identity construction and identity become more important in politics.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I am wondering, I feel like as a younger person, like we've just like kind of inherited this world of polarized, whatever you want to call it. And I'm wondering what the call to action is, like for all of us. Like, what are you suggesting that we do about this? Or are you just reporting the facts? Like, do you want me to go marry a Republican, or
What's that?
what's going on?
We can get you a nice house in LaGrange. We'll set you up. Do you know how to polka? Yeah, what's the solution to a system that's actually working for people?
Is it work? I mean, are you suggesting that like this is working? Like that us being so polarized?
It's
is,
not
like,
working.
a good thing?
It's not working in the ways that we'd like to think about, but it's certainly working as a way for us to identify who we are. I'm not them. Those people are easily identifiable. I'm with my group. They're with their group. This is who I am.
Yeah, I really don't buy that, honestly. Well, to me, I feel like honestly, if we like wanted to decide like whether cheese was good or not, and the Republicans said cheese was good and Democrats said cheese was bad, like we would probably identify with that. So I think that we're actually, by doing this, like moving further away from who we are, that we're believing these like things about that identify us as like, we're saying we're these things and we're really not. I think we're actually more alike than we are different. But that's just me.
Well,
I don't have a book, and I'm not presenting at
Who
the
were you?
IdeaFestival.
yeah, who we really are. If you look at all the data, we're getting more different, and Republicans and Democrats are more. I just saw a thing the other day. Republicans and Democrats differ more, increasingly more, on whether Donald Trump has a toupee. I mean, the different, find any issue and we separate, and those separations are increasing, not decreasing.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the sort is entirely organic, or are there groups or forces at work that have an interest in seeing polarization be, more prevalent?
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's any vast conspiracy.
Oh yeah, no, not.
But I do think that capital takes advantage of situations, and so there's a subdivision in California. In fact, there's subdivisions all around. You go in the same road, and you go off to one side, and the houses are low slung. They have bamboo floors, and their Montessori school is over there. And then you go to the left, and the houses have big columns, and there's a Christian school over on that side. So the market is more than willing to provide a Fox News and an MSNBC. It's more than willing to provide a market solution or a market supply for polarization.
So I mean, in your research and your work, you haven't seen that politicians or whoever powerful figures are encouraging the sort for their own. Have you seen like a?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. And so the people that benefit have the strongest opinions, and we can see that in the race now. So the more who wants to identify, if politics is now more about identity than about policy, why would you want your identity balled up in some namby-pamby middle of the roader? We want someone who strongly has a strong identity, because that's us. And so the people with strong policy positions and strong personalities are showing their stuff now.
Those that have strong identities also live in communities that are strong. You're talking about this in your book. But those communities don't have strong economies.
Well, Austin is, as a Democrat as you can get, and we're pulling people in from left and right. We're doing
But
great.
as we look at states, for example, so the Bible Belt states have more strong community, but their economies, they have lower wages, lower patents, and so
that's the community diversity paradox.
yeah. So the migration of knowledge worker, which is a study done by the Millikan Institute, says that Kentucky, for example, ranks 49th among migration of knowledge worker, which means do smart people want to come here? We rank 49th. But we have a strong sense of community. So is it better to have a strong sense of community or a strong economy?
You all decide.
Well, we brought you here to answer.
I don't know. I mean, I moved from a strong economy to a place with a strong community, and I'm telling you, there's a lot to be. There's a lot of benefit to a strong community.
Yes, sir.
In one of your graphs, it looked like faith in government plunged in the 60s and probably into the early 70s. And during that time, the Vietnam War was going pretty strong, and we had a big recession during the Jimmy Carter days. So that's one part of the question, and the other part of the question is this whole trend cyclical, and does government have some control over reversing the trend? I mean, I'm in favor of reversing the trend myself. So, I mean, and maybe I'm in the minority. I don't know, but what about that?
Yeah, I mean, all trends, everything ends, right? All trends end.
right.
So this will end sometime too. It just hadn't ended yet. And so, yeah, it will end. But the trust declined not only in the United States during that time, but across all industrialized countries. So Jimmy Carter wasn't in New Zealand, you know. Watergate wasn't in...
Yeah, but the Vietnam War was a pretty strong war.
In Sweden?
Probably
The same thing happened in Sweden as in the United States. The same thing happened in Japan as it happened in the United States. The same decline in faith in government happened across the industrialized world, which leads me to believe it's more about modernity and what comes with modernity than any particular thing happening in an individual country.
We got about 5 minutes left, and we got a bunch of people who want to talk, so let's try to do this as fast as we can. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. I have two different questions. One of the things I was surprised that you didn't mention was a decline in voter participation and how that might curtail into the increasing polarization. And so I'm wondering whether or not that also shows up in some of your models when you're looking at the justification for increasingly identifying as one party or another. And then the second thing is sort of goes nicely with the last question and your comment about modernity is this, I think, internal struggle that we have about what it actually means to be American, and sort of this idea that we, instead of having a debate or sort of having a debate about others and othering people that live in other countries, we're having an internal debate about what it means internally to be American and which party is more inherently American. So the othering becomes an internal struggle instead of, you know, we're this united country, united front against the Cold War and against the Soviets, and how the globalization is sort of feeding into individualized identity politics instead of community politics, I guess. So
Yeah,
two
I mean,
questions.
the thing is, it's all internal now. We all get to decide everything. We get to decide, truth is decided individually, not as a group. What America means as a country is decided individually. Global warming, hey, it's decided, you know, we decide individually whether it's true or not. And so what happens to a country where everything, nothing is decided, nothing is a given, nothing is passed along, everything is decided individually. And that's what I mean by the problem of identity construction takes over from every other issue. As for voting, I think, remember we have some political scientists here, but I don't think voting has declined. If you look at Michael McDonald is the scholar on voting participation, it's about the same. Has been about the same since the 60s. And if you control for different demographic groups and ages and all that stuff, it's the same.
Political knowledge is the thing that's really plummeted in the last 40 years. Deli, Carpini, and Keeter is a good reference for that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Shannon Wood. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm from a suburb about 20 minutes south of Ferguson. Darren Wilson's son attended my high school. I kind of have a problem with the segregation between counties because it's recently caused us and the whole United States a lot of problems. And I think it's because we never interact with each other. So I think there is a problem. What do you think we can do to solve, you know, we can't really have people living in different neighborhoods and not getting along. How do we solve that?
And in fact, segregation is increasing not necessarily by race, and especially in our fast-growing cities, segregation is increasing by income and by education.
Yeah.
So we go to our most diverse cities. I can tell you, living in a town of 4,800 in Texas, I have a more diverse life than living in Austin, Texas, 1.8 million people, because neighborhoods in Austin and in fast-growing cities are increasingly segregating by income and education.
I spent last semester in Sydney, Australia, where they use a lot of public transportation, and it was super diverse. And I wonder why they have things like terrace in cafes, and then everyone offers to ride with people on trains of that race, and why we don't have that here.
Don't know.
Did you hear about that, the Lint Cafe? It's pretty interesting. You should look it up.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My question is right along those lines. Okay, so Churchill said that we shape our spaces and then they shape us. What you were talking about, people segregating by, you turn left, you get the houses that are precisely $172,000 to $189,000, and then across the street it's the next $15,000 increment. A lot of that is because of zoning and government regulation. How has that contributed to the big sort you're talking about, and could it be a tool for undoing it? We've made progress locally in that area, but we have a long way to go, and lots of Louisvillians are leaving, not just to find people like them, but to find walkable, livable cities, Portland, Nashville, Austin, because they think that's what they're looking for, someplace diverse, someplace a little more forward-thinking about that kind of thing.
Diverse and walkable places will be diverse as long as diversity does not include Republicans. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I remember at one talk I had someone coming from San Francisco saying, I come from a very diverse town, San Francisco. And it's like, are you kidding me? It's not, I mean, no, I think the point is we're choosing places based on our lifestyle choice, which then reflects our politics. So Democrats choose the walkable place, the place with smaller houses with the front porches and all the Jane Jacobs stuff, and Republicans choose another place. So we're not being shaped as much by our place as we are shaping the place by our choices.
So Putnam talked about urban sprawl as being an example of one of those triggers back in the 60s, but now we have almost perfect information. How has the advent of the advance of technology and the ability to find these places contributed to this?
We have more information to do what we do naturally. And, we you just have to drop yourself into a city and you can tell where, what kind of place it is, what kind of neighborhood it is.
Real quick, last question. Yes, sir.
It's now relevant more than ever that for some reason people's religion is becoming increasingly more linked to their politics. I mean, have you ever heard of an atheist Republican? Like, it sounds so contradictory now. And those are really similar to circumstances that are predate war. And I'm not implying that we're going to go in some sort of war, but it seems like that this polarization, especially being linked to religion, can lead to something very dangerous. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, polarization based. Yeah, I'm not sure that I think that religion overall among Republicans and Democrats is declining. I mean, so I don't think religion is driving, it's one of the markers, but it's not driving the polarization. I think the polarization is more one of lifestyle, and religion plays a part of it. I mean, it's really interesting. Back 50, 60 years ago, I mean, most progressive politics in the United States began in religious communities. The anti-slavery movement, the union movement, now it's reversed, but basically religion is a receding part of American life, not something that's driving anything.
Let's thank Bill Bishop for his time today.
Thank you all.